topic says legal literature and research. So I try to, cover certain areas with respect to research, as well as research for publication, as well as research for teaching. I assume that previous three sessions mainly talked about research and academic research primarily. So I thought I'll make some changes and try to focus on teaching and research for the purpose of teaching. So research, as we all know, is a systematic inquiry to answer a particular question, especially the research question which we frame. So I will not go much into deeper into what is research. We all know, you all know, and you have been listening in this FTP also for last 2 to 3 days. Essentially, I wanted to focus my topic regarding research for academic purposes as well as research for teaching. So as a teacher, we are always involved into teaching, into research, whether it is reading a case, whether it is going through the text of the statute or any other scholarly article. So research is inherent, research is inevitable, research is connected with the teaching. So there is no escape from research, even if we are not into academic research for the time being. And just 2 to 3 slides I have included on topic research for academic purposes. And I have come across a particular article or particular reading which gives a different perspective to the way we look at our research, or different nomenclature, so to say, to what we have been doing in academic research. So it says that you may follow 3 steps. One is identify a particular philosophical worldview, which they also call as paradigm or epistemologies, or you may say perspectives. For instance, we have a gender perspective, we have perspective wherein we look at the rights of the child. So different perspective we need to, rights approach, rights perspective. So there can be a different perspective. So if we can identify in the beginning itself what is the perspective with which we are going to go ahead, it will give us clarity, it will give us direction to our research. So whether we are ourselves doing some research either for PhD or for LLM, or we are guiding the PhD or LLM candidates, so we also need to have some clarity on the perspective, and we can also prompt our candidate to think about the perspective which they are going to take. And then second step is the research design, which these 3 terms we have been always hearing and seeing, reading: qualitative design, quantitative design, and mixed design. I'll not go into specifics of that. And third step is research methods of data collection. So once we have identified what is the procedure or strategy of our inquiry, it becomes easier, it gives us clarity what kind of data we require and what is the strategy for acquisition or gathering the data. So it comes to data collection, analysis, and interpretation. So whether it is again qualitative or quantitative would depend. Essentially, there are 4 major perspectives or approaches to a particular research problem. One is I particularly find it more applicable is post-positivism. Post-positivism means what we also call as deductive method, where there is a theory which is already there and we are trying to test that theory. For instance, if I may give an example, that democracy is the best form of governance. So we are trying to test that theory to different settings, whether it is India or any other country, or Bangladesh or China. So we are trying to see whether this particular hypothesis or particular theory is holding good nowadays. So it is also known as reductionism or empirical observation or measurement or theory verification. So post-positivism, where in a positive theory, positively it is established and we are trying to test that, we are trying to go into its application and see what are the results. Second is constructivism, wherein we are trying to construct the meaning of a particular phenomena which is existing, a particular process which is existing, multiple, if there is anything new development happens in a society, or new thing, new process comes across, so we try to understand. So we are trying to construct the meaning of that particular, what is the reason, what are the effects of that particular process, is constructivism. Third is transformative. It is essentially for in matters where which are not in the mainstream, for marginalized groups. If we are conducting some research, let's say for children, for senior citizens, for women, for on those who have been discriminated on racial basis or caste basis. So we are trying to see how their their concerns, their problems, and how that can be transformed. So we are trying to find the answers that may be a transformative perspective. And fourth is pragmatism. Again, it prompts us to look into the consequences of actions. It is also a problem centric approach, wherein there is a problem and we are trying to find a pragmatic approach to how to solve that. So these are four worldview which I thought could interest you. Then again, as I said, research design, we all know quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. And similar is the case with qualitative collection of data, which is qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative, at the very basic level, we can describe it as use of words, or where we are not looking at the numbers, but we are looking at the words, whether it is case, whether it is text, whether it is case study, whether we are observing some phenomena in the society, or whether we are talking about rights, obligations, duties, state responsibility. So it is all use of words. So it becomes a qualitative. And quantitative, where we are talking about the numbers. So quantitative may we have statistical interpretation of any data which we collect, and questions are close-ended, and we collect the data, the numbers, and then we try to analyze and see what results come out. Whereas qualitative, maybe we try to understand different cases, case law, probably text, probably the laws from different jurisdiction, other countries, and try to analyze and see what answers we can find for our problem. So these are some of the 3 steps which I thought I could summarize how you should approach, or how you may like to approach your research, whether it is for writing dissertation, thesis, or for guiding dissertation or thesis, irrespective of that. Here I again would like you to indulge in a small activity which will not take probably more than 10 minutes, and wherein I'm asking you few areas. I'm stating few areas wherein you can see and identify which approach would you like to adopt and why. You need to justify also. This is a small activity which I devised for this particular FDP, and I want you to take 3 to 4 minutes and reflect upon if you have to do research on environmental pollution, or independence of judiciary, or protection of rights of shareholders, or protection of persons with disability or domestic violence. I want all of you to pick up one topic, one area, and try to see what worldview would you like to apply. How would you, what would be your research design, and what would be the research method you would like to apply. So take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and identify one area and try to apply. You can cross that you want to take this, and then probably you want to take quantitative, and then probably you want to take mixed. Just indulge yourself in this activity, and we'll get back in 2 minutes. Been indulging in research. What is teaching learning process? We might have attended many FDPs on this also. So teaching learning is a process that includes many variables, and those variables interact with each other to achieve a particular goal, and that is learning. And where we teach to learn or learn to teach. So we are teaching students to learn, and we are learning how to teach them. So it is a two-way process. We are learning from students, we are learning their needs, and then we are modifying or adjusting our teaching techniques to suit their requirements or needs. So learning is about change by development of a new skill, understanding a scientific principle, or changing attitude, which is a relatively permanent change. Once you have learned something, there is a permanent change in you, whether you remember that skill again or not, whether you remember that information or not, but it has changed you, change something in you for permanency, for permanent. And this process of learning is mainly internal, whereas teaching is an external process wherein it's a set of events outside learner which are designed to support internal process of the learning. So we as a teacher are helping them to learn. So teaching is an external process, whereas learning by the student is an internal process. Nowadays the role of a teacher has changed from more of a mentoring, more of a facilitator, facilitating learner to learn the subject, whatever is the content, whatever is his interest area. We want to facilitate them to achieve what they want to, rather than dictating them that you have to learn this or you have to achieve this. So role of the teacher has changed. Then we have a very interesting statement or saying, which is particularly very interesting to me. Tell me I forget, teach me I remember, and involve me I learn. So and it is a established fact that once if we listen, probably we can't remember more than 10 to 15% of what we have heard. But if we get involved, we learn, and that learning remains with us for longer duration of time. So lecturing method is no more a preferred method, though we all tend to indulge in lecturing method, and I'm also doing the same right now, I guess. Teaching involves planning and action, and to my mind, a teacher has to continuously read and think, and also plan. So there are three stages for a teacher primarily to do some research and to do some planning. One is before the start of the session or the course, whichever course we are trying to teach. Then second stage is when during the academic session is going on, and third is afterwards when we conduct the examination. So all three stages, I assume the teacher has to read and think and implement or make changes in their methodology or in their techniques. Before the start of the session, we are moving our education from objectives to outcome-based learning, wherein I have come across an interesting concept of design thinking that I'll talk about in a minute. Before the start of the course, whichever course we are taking, whether it is legal English, whether it is TOTS, whether it is company law, whether it is land law, whether it is competition law, need to think as a teacher, need to think about the objectives and outcomes, whether they are properly defined, described, whether they are objectively defined, or whether you agree with them or you want to make certain changes. Program learning outcomes and course outcomes need to be defined clearly. Then there is a Bloom's taxonomy levels of learning, which in legal education so far, Bloom's taxonomy has not been widely implemented, but some of the universities, some of the teachers at their individual levels, they are trying to implement, trying to work on that. And personally, I feel it gives a good insight to the teachers also if they look at their courses and the way they teach from the Bloom's taxonomy perspective, and aligning then course outcome with those of the program outcomes. So these are the three important steps before we plan for our course to go into teaching that particular course. So scanning through the course outline once again and make a strategy of our lesson plan. whether it is day wise, topic wise, and what course objectives we are trying to achieve or program objective that particular topic will achieve. So we have to align so many things before we start teaching into. So the purpose of all this exercise is to make teacher indulge in reflective teaching rather than getting into mindless teaching. They feel ki pehla topic hai, I'll just go tomorrow and teach something. So that practice is no more acceptable. Teacher has to indulge in lots of thinking and planning the way they want to conduct or deliver the course. Identify teaching techniques in the beginning. Probably you may change later on, but with every topic, if you can identify your teaching or your approach in the class, which method you would like to adopt to teach a particular topic. In a particular subject, different topics might require different techniques to be adopted. So that also, as a teacher, we need to think about. And then then assessment methods, whether it is examination, whether it is some other activity through which we want to assess the skills, the learning of the child, of the student is also important. And then we need to devise some rubrics for each method so as to bring objectivity in our assessment. We heard in the beginning, many of the teachers said that, one of the teachers said that they appreciated the teacher in her 12th standard. She was very objective and pretty could pinpoint with her assessment. So objectivity, fairness is very important. Should not only be there, that should seem to be there also. So rubrics would help us to become more objective in our assessment. Then I just talked about design thinking. Design thinking, something which has been adopted in management schools, and it is also now being implemented in for teachers. There are roughly 3 to 4 to 5 stages of design thinking. Actually, there are more, but are more accepted stages. Wherein it is about first empathize, second is to define, third is to ideate, fourth prototype, and if we implement these 5 stages to our teaching, so it comes about like you empathize. In the sense, you think about the student, you enter into the shoes of the student and think about how we want to be taught. So as a student, what is their requirement, how they assume, or what is their viewpoint, the way they should be taught. So entering into the shoes of the student and trying to understand their requirements is the first aspect. Second is to define. When you enter into the shoes of a student and you come out as a teacher, you need to define what are the requirements of a student. This may not only come as when you place yourself in the shoes of the student, but also when you interact with the student. You can specifically take feedback or opinions of the students. What do they think about your teaching? What do they think about the content? The way it should be delivered, the way it should be approached. So defining their needs, problems, and insight, not only by your own reflections, but also by talking to the student. Third is to ideate. Then you challenge those something you thought I go and teach in a particular manner. So you have to challenge that. No, this is no more acceptable. I need to change. I need to align it with the requirements and needs of the student, because ultimately student's learning is the main objective or the goal. And then we create certain strategies, whether these strategy will work, whether for this particular topic, this particular strategy should be adopted. And then you test that strategy. Sometimes it doesn't. All the time intuitive. You need to read about those. Also to read about whether it should be taught in a particular, through a particular technology, a particular technique. And whether it is working for us, whether it will work for you. So you need to always think, change, adapt, and refine your techniques and refine your content. There is no hierarchy. All the stages should be there, but they are not in the order in which they are specified. Sometimes you adopt a technique and then you take a feedback from the student. whether they like the way you have approached this particular topic or particular subject. So going back and forth is also very important. Design, if it is applied to teaching learning, as I have already explained, it's understanding the students, their requirement, needs, and challenging the assumptions or preconceived notion. Sometimes we also have the image of our teachers, the way they taught, will go and teach in that manner. So we need to challenge those assumptions. No, the times have changed, the requirements have changed. Probably students are now learning in new other ways, or some other teachers are adopting other methods. So we also need to change and adopt different methods. Redefining the problem, why they are not learning, why they are not interested, why they are not motivated. So need to understand their problems, redefine the problems, and identify the alternative. And then what are the benefits of design thinking? Again, it is helpful where problems are ill-defined or unknown. We don't know why students are not, we don't know why they are not motivated. We sometimes tend to blame the system, tend to blame the parents, students, sometimes ourselves also, that we are not motivating them, so on and so forth. So there is no one concrete, problem can be identified. It's a mix of many variables. So it helps you to, rework on the problem again and again, and reframing the problem in human-centric ways, because students' learning is your target. So you take them into the process, they participate in identifying the problem and finding a solution. They give you feedback, they share with you the problems, so on and so forth. So creating ideas and strategies in brainstorming sessions and adopting hands-on approach. Sometimes many strategies do not work, or they work in some settings but they do not work in other settings. So if you are teaching in one particular class, you may be successful, but when you next year when you teach the same subject to other set of students, it may not work. So it's important to adapt to the requirements and needs of the different set of students. With that, we come to another activity. Again, we would like to have 2 or 3, people to participate in. This is an activity which is related to understanding barriers of learning. We always talk about students are not learning. We are teaching. I'm such a good teacher. I do so much work. I do so much research. I teach them. My command over the language is very good. I'm a dedicated teacher and I deliver to the best of my ability. Still, students are not interested. They sometimes make fun of me. Sometimes they are not interested. They are not motivated. So what is that which creates barrier in their learning? Despite our 100% efforts, results are not 100%. And one reason is, probably we all know, is that students are not putting in efforts which they are supposed to. But apart from that, what is that which prohibits him or restricts him in putting 100% efforts? So this, to my mind, is barriers to learning. We might have understood, we might have read this concept earlier also. What my purpose was to take your opinion on barriers to classroom learning is, there are certain kinds of barrier from the side of the teachers. Sometimes there are barriers from the perspective of the message or the content to be delivered. Third is method and media. Fourth is student related. They may have some problems at home. They may not be in that mood. They may not be in that, the content they might find is very difficult. So student related barriers can be there. And then there are learning environment related barriers. So these are some of the barriers which we have, through such surveys we have come across, and we have lots of student related barriers, teacher related barrier, wherein sometimes it is the communication from the teacher is not that convenient or comfortable for the student. Sometimes the inadequate knowledge of a teacher, sometimes lack of motivation, lack of confidence, inability to build rapport with the student, that came in the discussion in the beginning, was very well highlighted. Sometimes bias and prejudice of the teacher also comes in the as a learning barrier for the student. or inadvertently, teachers try to be unfair or discriminate the student among students. Then we have inept language. Probably a medium of instruction also could be one reason wherein some student may not be comfortable. So we are talking about from the perspective of each and every child in the class, what may act as a barrier for him to have an effective learning. Then we have content related, lack of supporting material, lack of clarity of objectives, inappropriate structure, inappropriate language, irrelevant information, technical jargon, lack of exercise and activities, and lack of examples or metaphors. So how you make that content interesting? If it is very dry, if it is very theoretical, probably you can break it into different segments and approach the content. We all know the span of attention of everybody is reducing, especially of the students. So what we have found is around 12 to 15 minutes one can pay attention to one thing. So if you have a class, if you have a session of roughly 50 minutes to 1 hour, probably you can divide your lecture or content in 3 segments and take a break of 2 to 3 minutes. So you introduce the concept for, let's say, 10-12 minutes, and then give some exercise to the student. And that's precisely what I'm trying to do in this. Then we have some method and media related learning barriers. We have student related also. Sometimes they are they are not interested, they have some problem at home, so on and so forth there are. And then there are learning environment related barriers, which I'll share the slides and you can look at. Moving from again, we are still at the pre-planning, pre-execution stage where we are planning about the course. So we have now moved from objective to outcome-based learning, outcome-based education, wherein outcomes are more specific, more measurable, more quantifiable. Objectives are broad, and then ultimately there is a big goal, which is every student may have different goals, but this goal is different from that goal. Here the goal means we are talking about the competency which we want student to obtain at the end of this particular. So whether they become, whether what they do with their legal knowledge, whether they go into banking sector, whether they decide to go into practice, whether they decide to go into teaching, that may be a different goal altogether. But here we are talking about the program goal, what we want at the end of the program, what students should get. So goal is broad definition of student competencies, and from there we come narrowly to the objectives, which describe what a faculty member will cover in the course, or the institution or the university or the teacher will try to achieve. So objective is what we said from our side, what we will achieve. It is broader than the outcome, but it is less broader than the goals. And third, we have at the very, very basic level, concrete level, is outcomes. Outcomes reflect what a student would be able to do at the conclusion of the course. So it is more of use of verbs that are measurable and quantifiable. If I can just share with you, open verbs with varying interpretation, and then close verbs with fewer interpretation, and outcomes should be written starting with a verb, and wherein it's more precise, more measurable, not in quantity but at least observable objectively. So these are some of the verbs which are suggested to be used to write your objectives, your outcome. Examples of, one example I could think of is course outcome with respect to law of torts, probably. To identify the nature of tortious wrong. Second is to differentiate. Third is to apply. Fourth is to undertake advocacy. Fourth is to offer counseling. So you need to think about each and every word which you choose to use to define your outcomes. Outcomes should be what student will be able to achieve after reading the content which you are proposing in your course. So outcome has to be different from objective. Objective is of the person who is doing, and the outcome is what other person will achieve at the end of the course. So it's important to use these words to write, recite, identify, sort, solve, construct, build, offer, apply, compare, draft, identify. So these are the words which you consciously try to use so as to clearly define your outcomes. Then we also have Bloom's taxonomy in legal education, which is still at a nascent stage, and we need to work upon that. And probably private universities like Amity or Manavashna can become leaders in that. Wherein Bloom's taxonomy has Benjamin Bloom talked about the framework of learning. According to him, there are three areas of learning. One is cognitive, wherein you have knowledge, you have comprehension, you have expressing that knowledge, so cognitive abilities. And then you have affective, wherein you talk about your emotions, your feelings, so affective domain. And third is psychomotor, you are talking about the skills. For instance, you have swimming, you have cycling, or any other skill which you, or fixing the fan or some broken thing you are trying to paste. So skill based. So we have three: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. There is no watertight compartmentalization in these three aspects, and all are related to each other. And then Bloom has talked about 6 levels of learning in every field. So cognitive also there are 6 levels, affective also there are 6, and then psychomotor also there are 6. Starts from remember, to understand, to apply, to analyze, to evaluate, and to create finally. And this is interesting to understand because it's easy to implement these stages in a technical education, and especially the universities which have engineering or other technical courses. They are emphasizing on Bloom's taxonomy, especially where the education department is more active and forcing other departments to adopt Bloom's taxonomy. Whereas standalone colleges or the universities which are not multi-disciplinary or multi-departmental, probably they are not paying that much attention to Bloom's taxonomy. But again, the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy, again to my mind, is to make the teacher indulge in reflective teaching. So we have 6 again levels of Bloom's, wherein we can use to turn an ordinary law graduate into a finer legal professional. And if he reaches to the highest level of learning, probably he'll be very, very successful. And then we have moderate level, wherein students just pass out, get the degree, and do something with that degree. So and also, so our efforts as a university, as a teacher, is to raise their level of learning from remember to creation. Bloom's taxonomy, according to Bloom's taxonomy, first level is the lowest level is remember, where a student is able to refine, recall, or identify. For example, you ask a definition of tort, and he says Winfield and Salmond has given this definition. So he has read, he has remembered, and now he is reproducing. That is very, very basic level of their understanding, level of learning. Then comes understanding, wherein he is trying to explain the definition. Probably it is an exhaustive definition, or it is inclusive definition, or different components of that definition he is trying to break into and trying to clarify, or summarize, or restate, or paraphrase the definitions. That is the second level. Then comes the third level, wherein he is applying the knowledge which he has to the problem at hand, wherein they are trying to make a legal brief or moot memorial, case brief, or problem solving. A small problem you have given, what you have taught, on the basis of that you have devised a new problem which they have not already read, and you are asking them to apply the principle, and they come up with the solution. For instance, you have strict liability cases where you have discussed the cases and you give a problem and they try to apply absolute liability or strict liability. So that's application. These 3 levels are lower order learning, whereas the first, second, and third are higher order learning levels. wherein they are, fourth level is analyzing, wherein they categorize, classify, compare, distinguish, point out, subdivide, survey. All these things, if they indulge in, if you can take them to that level, it is the fourth level. Then they come up again, fifth level is to evaluate, wherein they have read some case and now they are making a case comment. So it comes in evaluation, where they are evaluating different aspect of the case and giving their opinion after reading other scholarly articles. Or a research article which is published, review of literature, drafting petitions, probably these are evaluation. They are evaluating the problem of the client and then writing a petition on behalf of the client and presenting in the court. And the highest level of learning is to create, wherein he is creating some new models, some drafting new legislation, or probably arguing in a new very novel case. Let's say, for instance, Aadhaar case was, there was no, assumably there was no previous case on that particular aspect. So if there is new legislation, new problem, and it is challenged in the court, the way you draft, the way advocates draft is to create. And I hear that some petitions are filed in Supreme Court regarding COVID, also China's responsibility. So probably that also can be called as, they are creating something, they are drafting, proposing some new models. Principle is applied to a new situation or context. So these are levels of learning, and our efforts as a teacher should be to, raise their level to at least to fourth and fifth level, where they are analyzing or evaluating. And this is the difference between an ordinary advocate, good advocate, and best advocate. So level of learning will determine the difference between these advocates also. Again, I have devised that this is a simple exercise which we'll do online itself, wherein I have cited certain activities, and I want you to, explain or to answer which level of Bloom they reflect. Can I have some answers? Because if it becomes monologue, I'm sure after 15 minutes you will lose all interest. So applying the Bloom's taxonomy to the question or activity, if you are asking a student to prepare a bail petition on behalf of the accused, which Bloom level is being applied here? Can anybody give some answer? And why? If you want to go back to the Bloom's level, these are the 6 Bloom's level. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So these are the 6 levels, and I want you to answer. If you ask a student, or if a student is preparing a bail petition on behalf of the accused, which level of learning is he reflecting? Whether it is third, whether it is application, whether it is evaluation, whether it is creation.
Yeah, someone please.
It would be application, ma'am.
Okay.
Because
can you
actually preparing a draft or preparing a bail application based on the information available and according to the principles that have been taught. So it would be application of that particular law.
Right. So application of law to a given situation, wherein he has asked the client what are the issues, what are the problems, but he has also analyzed it to some extent, whether yes, bail application should be there, should be applied, should it be filed or not filed. So some amount of evaluation also, right, where he is using his own judgment. Yes. So it's not plainly drafting. It is going one step higher, wherein he has to evaluate the circumstances, how best he can, file the application and whether it should be filed or not. Okay. Then preparing a questionnaire for examination in chief. Students usually go for internship, and there they are given certain tasks. So though this is, to my mind, it is higher level of learning, which is reflected in preparing questionnaire for examination in chief. Drafting
yes.
a moot problem, for instance, you are conducting a moot and you are asking a group of students to draft a moot problem. So what would be the level of learning which is reflected in that particular activity? Then suggesting solution to counter the effects of climate change at local level. Analyzing legal provisions relating to investor protection or effect of triple talaq judgment on those who practice triple talaq, or written statement on behalf of the respondent in a consumer case. So this is again an activity I'll share, and probably you can practice at home and reflect upon that. Then it brings me to the second level of our planning, wherein we are into the session, and also before the session, what are the teaching techniques we should adopt, we might adopt, and experiment with those techniques. It's important for teachers to indulge in reflective teaching. That's my underlying statement. That's my underlying suggestion. Teaching techniques, there is again a new methodology, which is agile methodology, which has come about. You might have heard about agile methodology. Some people say it is an acronym. It's not a correct description. There is no agile methodology. It is only agile. There are certain rules and procedures, rules and values, or principles and values which inform any methodology. So agile methodology per se is not an independent methodology. It is the set of rules and principles which may be there in any kind of methodology which may choose to adopt. So briefly, agile methodology talks about agile methodology is wherein we break our content in different segments. This is the term which has come from especially programming, computer sciences, programming or software development, wherein earlier the trend was that if a person is asking that I want a particular software, for instance, WhatsApp is a application, software application. So if somebody wants the similar software like WhatsApp, so they will approach a company, and company will say after 1 year I will give you the entire set of software. But now under agile methodology, it is the different steps, and one whole software involves different applications. So it is again, agility means ability to adapt. So again, it is not the span of 1 year, it is broken into different time spans, that first step or first application, first component of that application, then second component, then third component, then fourth component. And as the requirement of the buyer or the user changes, probably there can be software can be changed or application can be changed. And similar is the case, it is again design thinking, it is again agile methodology, wherein you interact with the student, understand their requirement, and change your methods or techniques to adapt to their requirements. And teaching techniques, to my mind, there are mainly I understand there are 3 to 4 sources of information for a law professional. That is legal text, statute, then you have case laws, then you have case studies, and then you have scholarly writing or judgments, case law, that is case law, or experiential reflections which you have gained after teaching for so many years. And these are some of the methods which we indulge in routinely. One is lecture, another is active learning, third is collaborative or cooperative learning. Lecture is very, very common, very, very structured way of delivering the content in the classroom, but it is sometimes, and most of the time, it's very boring for the student to listen. So nowadays the trend is that we should indulge more in active learning, wherein we are involving the student to actively participate in the learning process rather than passively sitting and listening. And sometimes they do not even listen, sometimes they are just sleeping, sometimes they are listening but nothing is going in their head. So active learning is a more effective way of delivering a content or making the student learn. And third is cooperative or collaborative learning. These two terms are used interchangeably, cooperative and collaborative learning. Cooperative and collaborative learning has different methods wherein you can adopt different techniques, wherein they think, pair and share, team, pair, solo, circle the stage, or jigsaw. If I can just give one example of let's say think, pair and share. If you have given let's say one topic for a student to understand or to read, or you have explained something, let's say for instance you are saying that what are the symptoms of if you get infected by the virus COVID, under COVID situations. So you are explaining to them what are the symptoms, and then probably you ask them to think about more symptoms, or whatever they have heard, whatever they have read otherwise. Then you make pair of two students and ask them to discuss with each other, and then they share with the entire class what their observations are. So these are some of the techniques which can be adopted, wherein the benefit of cooperative and collaborative learning is they are huge benefits, wherein students are actively involved, they participate in the learning process. There are psychological factors which work in it. Is they can openly talk or freely talk about with their peers rather than talking with the teachers. Sometimes students are shy, sometimes underconfident, but if they're in smaller groups, they can share with each other. And sometimes it happens like in collaborative teaching, we give a task to the team and ask the team to perform or to do the task as a team, and the same marks will be assigned to all the members. So irrespective of who is contributing how much, we tend to assign same marks. So it may have certain problems of free riding, but at the same time student make sure that other person is also working. So that's how they cooperate and command cooperation from others. So these are some of the techniques in cooperative and collaborative learning, and I want, as a teacher, we should experiment with these learning techniques. This is agile values and principles in methodology, think and interact, broken into individual models that in gist I have explained. So agility, how it transforms into teaching learning framework is when you deliver a lecture, you monitor the learning of the student, whether they have learned after your lecture, through feedback, through interacting with them, and then you adjust your lecture, your content, your technique. So that's how agility is transformed into your teaching. So agility means ability to adapt, whereas for a learner, it is you give them something to practice through assignments, then they indulge in independent study, then they share. So then they again have some assignment, they will indulge in that, they will complete that assignment, then they share that assignment with the teacher, with the peer. So that's how they also adapt to कि पिछली बार अच्छा हुआ था, इस बार अच्छा नहीं हुआ, पिछली बार मैंने ये किया था, इस बार ये किया. So it's a continuous agile process. Again, I want you to have a reflection on this particular thing. Like if you have this teaching techniques given to you, what are the topics from any subject, whichever subject you are teaching, which method, which topic you would like to teach through this, which method. So which topic you would approach from the case law perspective or case study perspective or debate. You would conduct a debate in what some particular topic or Socratic method or problem solving. So every content of every subject, every content of every subject requires different approach to be adopted. And then it's very important to have assessment methods. Assessment is very important. It gives, it not only assesses the present level of understanding of the learner, but it also gives feedback to the learner. There are 3 feedbacks: feedback, feed up, and feed forward. Feedback is when we conduct the exam and give them कि तुम्हारा इतनी teaching थी, इतना learning था, इतने marks मिले. Feed up is wherein you are, asking them to improve in that particular. They have written a, let's say, a proposal, and then you define that proposal and ask them to work further. Feed forward is move ahead, go ahead to other topic, something like that. So feedback system, feeding your inputs into the learning process of the student is very, very important. There Our assessment methods, we all as a university adopt formal and informal. We have midterm, end term, unit tests, something like that. And for informal also, we indulge in various methods. Internal assessment, what we call is 20% or 30%. Any assessment method which you choose should have the utility, and there are 5 factors of utility, which is: one is reliability, validity, educational effects, acceptance, and cost effectiveness. So any methodology, any method, assessment method you adopt, they should be tested on these 5 criteria of utility. For informal method, I would suggest there are hundreds of methods which may be adopted as for your informal assessment. As a teacher, you can ask student to indulge in these activities, whether to write a case brief, quiz, drafting an agreement, concept map, bibliography, abstract writing, teaching assignment, articles, drafting, report writing, presentation, viva voce, legal brief, memorial, comparative chart. For a particular my subject, I have given a task to assess the state of competition in a particular industry, whether it is civil aviation or cement industry or any other industry. Class test you may conduct, moot, problem drafting, organizing an event from A to Z, planning and execution. So these are some of the assessment methods. You can give the task to the student and assess them. And for that, it is important to have your course plan, case brief. There is a template which I can share with you, and then you tend to, you need to develop a rubric to assess your assessment method, whichever you are adopting. With this, we come to the end of the, my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amity University, for giving me this opportunity.